We've talked about house building on the podcast before, haven't we? Because it's one of the things that we think is one of the real problems in society is the lack of affordable housing. And the Labour government have, to their credit, a big target for house building. They wanted to build 1.5 million homes over the course of their 5-year parliamentary term. Who knows whether it'll be 5 years now, as it happens. So about 300,000 a year. They're actually building around about 200,000. So it's not that, I thought it was actually worse than that. Net new additions, I think, is the word they use. So these are not necessarily all new homes. They might be conversions of existing buildings or changing the configuration of an existing house. So,
or bringing disused buildings back into
correct.
use.
Yeah. So, but overall, the net new additions are around about 200,000. There are a number of policy levers that the government's established to push through additional house building. The first is mandatory local targets. The second is a change to the planning framework to encourage and prioritise building on brownfield sites. And the third is direct government subsidy of house building through, in England, Homes England. Now, on that mandatory local targets, people are some doing better, some doing worse against that. So I had a look at my council, for example, Trafford. I think their target's about 1,700 and they're building about 900. I checked Manchester. Manchester has a target of about 2,400 and it's broadly meeting that.
Yeah, I believe that there's 2 out of the 10 boroughs in Greater Manchester are meeting their targets.
Okay.
I want to say Salford is the other one. I think Manchester and Salford and all the other boroughs are not meeting their targets.
Okay. I did look at Wigan as well for reasons that will become clear.
Yes.
And they're not way off, I don't think, but they're not meeting their targets quite either. I think they had a 1,400 target and they're building 1,200, so they're not way out. By comparison, Kensington and Chelsea has a target of 5,000. Do you know how many? Do you want to guess how many they're building?
Oh, I really don't know because they could have been putting up massive towers. So are they smashing the target?
No,
quite the opposite. Go on.
200.
Wow.
Yeah, so they're way out. And, they've kind of pointed out that there are some challenges for them that perhaps other people don't have. It's quite a small borough, Kensington and Chelsea.
That just shows that this is a non-London podcast.
It does.
We know Greater Manchester.
Yeah.
We're not going to worry ourselves about London.
Yeah. So, what are the challenges to building houses, and what are the issues that house builders in particular are struggling with? Because the reason I want to cover this is there's been quite a bit of stuff in the news about one particular house builder, Vistry, which I'll come on to. But to start off with kind of generic issues for house builders, there's a number of challenges at the moment. One is, this is quite an interesting one, that there's a real move away from people wanting to live in flats, which might be a big shock to us in Manchester because that's all we see being built, isn't it? Massive flats. But I think there's a number of perhaps not entirely rational reasons. People worry about cladding and, that's not a worry in many flats. But also there's the exit of many of the buy-to-let landlords, and they tended to focus on flats. These are the kind of individuals maybe having a portfolio of 2 or 3 flats, and all of those people are leaving. I think partly because of the difficulties of making money out of it these days, but also the new Renters' Rights Act, which makes it a bit more tricky for the landlords to operate. So the exit of those means that, interestingly, the kind of balance between buying a flat and renting a flat is changing. But there is an issue in that a lot of the houses that were going to be built, or the homes that were going to be built, I should say, were going to be flats. And now there's a little bit of a question mark around whether that's the right way to go. So that's one challenge. There's other challenges. One is obviously rising costs. And we've talked about this for lots of employers, haven't we? Denby, Greggs and house builders. So the rising cost of employing people, additional NI, for example. The rising cost of raw materials for the building industry. So bricks, cement, all those kind of things tend to be high energy. They need a lot of energy to make, and so the rising cost of energy pushes up those prices. There's also the fact that borrowings are more expensive. So I don't know if you've noticed that a lot of the discussion, particularly around the leadership election, has been what's the effect on the gilt yield? That's the price that is charged by the markets to lend money to the UK government. And I think the gilt yield on 20-year gilts is about 5.7 now. It's quite a lot higher than it was. Now, when companies lend money from the market, they lend at something that's a bit more than what it costs to lend to government because they're riskier. So that gap, we call it the credit spread between what corporates can lend for and what government can lend for. Obviously, as the yield on gilts goes up, the yield that they have to pay on their debt goes up as well. So debt costs them more.
Yeah. Did you mean borrow when you said lend?
Oh, when they want to borrow money, correct?
Yeah.
Yes, sorry.
It's a bit through me.
I think that's a Bolton thing, you know.
Right,
We
yeah.
always got those two. Well, I think we use those interchangeably in Bolton.
Yeah, it's a bit like in Ireland. I'm sure they do the same where they use that interchangeably. Okay, that confused me, but I'm there now.
Can you borrow me that book?
Yeah, exactly.
Actually, in Bolton, we would say, can you borrow me that book? That's what we would say. So the cost of debt, the cost of the debt that they have has gone up quite a lot. So all those costs are a challenge. And the other problem that they're facing is that for those people who are about to buy a house, particularly first-time buyers, perhaps the fact that, you know, we were expecting maybe more rate cuts from the Bank of England, and we're probably not now because we think inflation is going to edge up more. So the prospect of more lending rate cuts is probably vanishingly small now. So perhaps people who were about to commit to a mortgage maybe aren't doing, and so sales are a bit sluggish. Now, that's an additional problem because obviously private sector house builders, they want to build houses and get them off into the market and sold so that they can then use that money as part of their cash flow. So those are all the problems that are facing house builders generally. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Vistry, which is it's often called Labour's favourite house builder. Other house builders are available, of course. Have you heard of Vistry?
Well, you mentioned that you were going to do this on the podcast, and I thought, I've not heard of Vistry, but they trade under different names.
They do.
I had heard of some of the other names.
Yeah, you'll know their brands like Bovis and Countryside. I think you'll have seen Linden Housing. I think you'll have seen those, I'm sure. So this is, one of the big house builders anyway, and it has been really struggling this year. Its share price has gone down by about 50%. And all those things that we talked about already are the challenges it's facing, but it also has a couple of other specific ones. There have been apparently some errors in their cost forecasting, and their chief exec resigned last week. So all those things are additional challenges for it. And it's another company where there's a lot of short selling going on. So we talked about this last week. This is where investors, they borrow stock from another investor, sell that stock on the market because they think that the price of that stock's going to go down. And when the price goes down, they'll then buy it back in the market and give it back to the person that they lent it off. So
betting against it, basically.
Yeah, it's betting, yeah. So there are, I think it's about something like 12% of the stock is being borrowed to facilitate that kind of short selling. So that's another problem for it. So its share price has fallen really significantly. And the Times was reporting over the weekend that they've actually instructed their subcontractors to stop building because they want to keep as much cash as they can in the business and not spend it on, outlay for the actual building that's meant to be going on. So anything that's they've not sold yet, or that's not due to be sold until after June, they have, according to the Times anyway, instructed the contractors to to stop building.
Isn't that a vicious circle? Because then they're stopping doing anything which is good, and it's going to cause the market to think that they're...
Yeah, I mean, certainly in market confidence, it's problematic. But the reason why they might do it is because they want to keep cash in the business. Now,
which the market might then recognise as a sensible thing to do.
Yeah. So I would say the reason why they maybe want to keep cash in the business is because they'll have a lot of what we call banking covenants. So you're looking at me like I've said something foreign there. So they'll have agreed the terms on which they can loan money from a probably quite a lot of different banking organisations, and that we call that the banking covenants, the promises it's made to back up the lending that it has. This is not necessarily long-term lending. This is maybe lending from banks to cover more short-term, cash flow issues. Now, I don't know what Vistra's banking covenants look like, but typically your banking covenant might say something like you can't, your borrowing in total can't exceed 50% of your market capitalisation. So if you look at the price of Vistra's shares, you look at the number of shares it has and multiply those together, that's the market capitalisation of the business. And the banking covenant might say your debt can't ever go above 50% of that, let's say. Now, the problem then for an organisation is that if their share price is going down quite a lot, they might have thought they had a lot of headroom against that banking covenant, but all of a sudden it all goes as their share price falls. So if they're suddenly scrabbling around thinking, we're going to fail our banking covenants, they then need to keep cash in the business. So that might be the reason why they're saying, let's not spend any more money in the short term. Let's, make sure that we just keep cash in house. One of the other things they've done is they were one of the organisations that used to return money to shareholders using what we call a share buyback. So every year there'd be a kind of like a lottery of the shares. And then if you held one of those shares, they would repay you, they'd buy it back off you. So part of your return as an investor on the shares came through the share buyback. It's something they do a lot more in America than here, but, it's something that is a feature for some organisations here. And because they want to keep money in the business, they've said they're not going to do any more share buybacks, which again pushes their share price down. So a lot of these things are really hard to kind of balance out against each other and know what the right thing to do is. It's all the tricky things about running a business. So things are pretty tricky, I would say, for Vistra. And I mean, I'm only saying that this is what the Times is reporting. I don't think we have any hard evidence of them saying that that people should stop work, but presumably they have a reasonable basis on which to write that article. They've also just mentioned, and I wonder whether this is just a bit. They're just trying to kind of over-egg the cake a bit. They said there's a number of the joint ventures that Vistra is involved with that haven't filed their accounts. Now, not filing your accounts is serious, but it does happen from time to time. And they've mentioned a couple of these joint ventures. So this is where Vistra doesn't build the houses as an organisation on its own. It has a joint venture with maybe a housing association or another developer. And they have a joint co that actually runs that business. But, it's not a good thing. It's not a good sign that they've not filed accounts. So whilst, you don't want to add to panic in the market, it does feel like there's some things that Vistra needs to be sorting out. But, I mean, at the end of the day, Labour's favourite house builder and all that, and the government have still got, I think it's £39 billion to spend on these the Homes England.
So that's money that they've set aside for house building.
Correct.
And
yeah.
They are putting it through bodies like Homes England.
Yeah.
Which, when a developer builds a new development,
Yeah.
they'll say, right, we'll offer you, if you build that development and make 40% of it affordable or whatever, we'll give you this amount of money. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. Now with Vistry, I think about 30% of its homes are built to sell to the private market. So they'll build and they'll sell it to somebody who wants to buy a house. The other 2/3 is actually directly work for things like social housing and local authorities and private landlords. So, all that worry about who I'm going to sell the house to is only to a third of their portfolio, but it looks like that's where they make a lot of their money, which is why the profit warnings and the fact that they've signalled to the market that they expect their profits to be impacted.
I don't understand that 2/3 is going to what? Because if you say social housing things, it doesn't seem like the government is building any social housing.
No, but social housing organisations build their own houses.
Housing associations?
Housing associations build new houses.
And you think 2/3 of what Vistry are building is going to things like that?
Correct. Yeah.
That really surprises me.
Yeah, well, that's 39 billion to spend that the government is using to pump prime. That's excluding any money that the housing associations themselves might have to spend on house building. There's a lot of money in house building. It's a risky business, but there's a lot to do. So, where am I ending up on all this? I think one of the reasons I wanted to cover it was just to make the point that we often think about house building as something that's like over there, and it's a really important thing. And if we could just train enough people, and that's not, I'm not saying we shouldn't be training enough people. That is something we need to do, but just that on its own doesn't solve the housing problem. And if it is going to be private developers who do a lot of house building, we do have to understand that a lot of these issues like gilt yields, rising cost of materials, people being unwilling to buy houses, all those things, there's a kind of really big interwoven lot of issues that affect how house builders operate. And it's a very interconnected world. Is, I guess, the point I think is important to hold on to.
So what we say as social democrats who believe that when there is a public good, it shouldn't necessarily just be left to the market. What would we say in relation to house building?
I mean, this I would say underlines the idea that just leaving it all to the market makes it quite unpredictable and volatile. Now, it's not to say that the state would not have some of the same problems, because it would still be facing the problems of the rising cost of materials. But the state has more levers to pull, and the state isn't subject to banking covenants that really restrict what it can do. So I would say this is another thing that pushes or bolsters our argument that we need to have more state house building.
And would you say that 39 billion that Homes England currently has would be better spent just building houses rather than funneling it through for private developers?
I always think a mixed economy is quite helpful. So, maybe using some of it to ensure that the private sector the private sector house builders do some of it. I don't think it's a bad thing, but certainly having more state house building, I think, would be sensible.